Hi, folks. I'm Abel James, and welcome to the Fat Burning Man Show, where we talk about real food and real results. Today's special guest is Dr. Sara Gottfried. It's an action-packed show. We talk about lots of taboo subjects, so stay tuned for that. Quick note before we get there, the Fat Burning Chef just launched last week, and thousands of you have already gotten it. It's gotten awesome feedback so far. I saw that some of you are sending me pictures of all of the amazing meals that you're creating from this book. And thank you so much for all of the positive support. Really appreciate it. All of the contributors we have, some of you who haven't heard about it yet, we took 20 of the top bloggers and authors in the cooking / paleo space, a little bit of slow food, gluten-free people as well, got them together and took some of their best recipes and put it into one collection called The Fat Burning Chef. If you'd like to check it out, it's at fatburningchef.com. We're still offering $20 off. And you have, let's see, 1 or 2 more days left to grab this iPad that I'm giving away. And you can check out the details at fatburningchef.com. So let's go on to the show with Dr. Sara. It was one of the more fun ones I've done recently. We talk about the ins and outs of molecular sex, the many benefits of orgasmic yoga and meditation, and most importantly, how to be a badass. All right, let's go hang out with Dr. Sara. All right, folks, today we're here with Dr. Sara Gottfried, who's a Harvard-educated physician, speaker, and author of The Hormone Cure. Dr. Gottfried is also known for quoting top 40 lyrics. What's the word, Doc?
Thrift shop. It's thrift shop today.
Thrift shop. I dig it. I used to live there. So you have an interesting story. I don't want to start with a cliche because I'm sure you've said it a million times, but I like the way that you framed it. I was reading up on your blog, the 4 F's: frazzled, frumpy, fat, and something else that starts with F. So can you just kind of go over a little bit of what you mean by that?
Yeah, so this comes up in the context of why did I write this book, The Hormone Cure? I was super excited to have this book resonate with so many people. We made it on the New York Times bestseller list using guerrilla marketing, which was super fun. And I often will be asked, why did I get interested in this stuff? And my answer is, I had to. Yeah. So I was in my 30s. I was premenstrual. I was struggling. I felt like I was pushing a rock up a hill and didn't want to have sex with my husband. And I just felt way too young. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to take a sip of water here.
Go for it. Out of your enormous mason jar.
Out of my enormous mason jar with the filtered water.
It's so freaking
So
cool.
I just felt like I was pushing a rock up a hill. Yeah. And I had a hunch that my problem was hormonal. But how did I feel? I felt those 4 F's. I was fat, frumpy, frazzled, and you can imagine what the 4th F was. I was not happy and I was miserable to be around. I was in couples therapy. And so I went to a doctor. And he told me that I should go on an antidepressant. He also recommended a birth control pill, which is, as we all know, like the thing you give to anyone who's hormonal. And it doesn't work. Like It robs you of testosterone and shrinks your clitoris by up to 20%. Not a good idea.
I had no idea.
I know. Who knew?
Sure
That's not on the package insert. Yeah. So I had a hunch that it was hormonal. It took me 1 month to get my hormones into balance. I had high cortisol, estrogen dominance, and a slow thyroid. So it took me 1 month to get that fixed. I dropped 25 pounds. My 4 F's went away. I graduated from couples therapy. It was a good thing.
Jeez. So what got you there in the first place?
What got me to the stressed out, crazy working mother place?
Exactly.
Well, the same way that many women find themselves in that position of, running from one task to the next, feeling tired but wired, feeling like there's no time in the day to slow down, to have a nice relaxed conversation or, God forbid, meditate. And I was just sort of a typical modern woman trying to rock my mission and going about it in all the wrong ways. I kept trying to work harder and not smarter. So what got me in that mess is really having stress that I was not managing well.
Okay.
I had distress. I didn't have good stress. I had bad stress.
Right.
And that's what makes cortisol climb, as you know. And then that causes just all kinds of chaos in the neighborhood of your body, from laying down visceral fat, that bad, metabolically hijacking type of fat,
right,
to robbing you of the happy brain chemicals like serotonin that's in charge of your mood, sleep, and appetite. So that's the tip of the iceberg, Abel.
Yeah. So you make it sound easy. Like, what happened? What did you do in that month that changed everything?
Well, I'm a biohacker. I don't know about you. I'm still getting to know you, Abel. I have a feeling that maybe you're a biohacker too. It sort of takes one to know one, right?
It does.
So I'm a fan of going all out and just figuring out, okay, here's what's going to move the needle. Here's what's proven with the best evidence. Here's what's got the best randomized trials behind it. And I discovered a few supplements that really moved the needle. Things like phosphatidylserine, omega-3s, which I had in my fridge, but I wasn't taking them. I became religious about taking 5 grams a day. And I had to learn how to hit the pause button. And honestly, that was a hard one for me because I felt like I was too busy to hit the pause button. But it was the piece that was really missing for me.
Yeah.
I was also a runner. And I think many of your listeners are probably elite athletes who train hard. And that doctor that I saw said, if you want to lose weight, you got to eat less, exercise more, do more running. And that was not the right advice either. I was already logging a lot of miles, and that just made my cortisol go up higher. That wasn't good advice.
I get the same exact advice from my doctor. That and take these 6 prescriptions.
Right. Like you're really going to find the answer to health in the latest pharmaceutical. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So did you stop running or did you throttle it back? What did that look like?
Well, it's interesting. At that time I was running mostly with girlfriends. And I don't know if you've been around women who are running, Abel, but there's a lot of therapy that happens. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. You're not sprinting. You're not, there's like a conversation going on. And so I shifted from working out in that way, kind of running with my girlfriends and going to the gym, kind of logging a lot of hours on the elliptical and the bike machine and spin classes. I shifted to burst training and doing more Pilates and yoga. I became a yoga teacher. Oh, cool. And I'm not saying that's what you need to do to get your hormones into balance, but I actually exercise about half as much as what I did in my 30s. I feel way better, and I weigh 25 pounds less. I've kept that 25 pounds off. Yeah.
So what is, you talked about cortisol. It's something that no one wants to talk about. Because
I know.
If you're just
in the room, right?
Oh, absolutely. So, I mean, if you're in the situation that you were in, cortisol just kind of like happens, right? Because your life is crazy and you're way too busy. And then on the other side of that, you have these kind of elite athletes who might be doing the CrossFit style exercise or endurance type training. I used to run marathons and I know that my cortisol was all out of whack. Why don't you talk about cortisol and why we should care about it? Because it's when people talk about fat loss or overall health, it's the thing that everyone wants to skip over and gloss over and be like, oh yeah, I know I need to be stressed less, but they completely just gloss over it. So let's not
gloss over. I'm so glad you said this because we've got to rebrand cortisol. Okay. So let's do that together, Abel, because you got to realize that there is a cost to being a badass. I hope I can say ass on your show. So
you can now.
Okay, good. Okay. So what we know is that when cortisol's high, when you're a bit of a stress junkie, like I used to be, I'm a recovering stress junkie now. When you like some drama in your life and you like variety and you like to kind of push the pedal to the metal, there's a cost to that. Not only does it make you lay down belly fat and make you take those steps towards insulin resistance and frying your hippocampus, that really important part of your brain that does emotional regulation and also memory consolidation. Like you need cortisol to be in the zone. Yeah. You need it to be not too high, not too low. And you're right that for most people, you start talking about stress and cortisol and there's just like this snooze fest that happens and they would rather do anything else but talk about it. And yet it is the small hinge that swings big doors. when it comes to your metabolism, when it comes to you rocking this mission and having the kind of lean body mass that you want as you get older.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I want to be in my 80s with like a better lean body mass than I have now. Like I want to constantly upgrade this. And cortisol is really key. It controls so many other hormones. And that's true for men and women. Mm-hmm. You know, I think about for women, I call it the hormonal Charlie's Angels. You want to have your cortisol, your estrogen, your thyroid working for you, not against you. Those are all really important hormones of metabolism. And for guys, I think about it as the three amigos, your cortisol, your testosterone, and your thyroid.
I dig it. So how do you know if your cortisol is out of whack?
Well, there's many ways to know. You know, the interesting thing is, I think it's very important to look at your experience, the symptoms that you're having. The reason for that is your levels, kind of the old school way of looking at cortisol, is not as reliable as we once thought. Mm-hmm. You know, certainly you can do a 24-hour urine, you can do your blood test in the morning, you can even check your adrenal reserve. Your adrenals are those cute little glands in your mid-back that secrete cortisol. And you can see how much reserve you have, how much organ reserve. You can do saliva levels, but they vary a fair amount.
Yeah.
And here's the totally sucky part. Your levels are not as important as how your hormone is having sex with the receptor.
Yeah.
And molecular sex is everything. Like that's a really important thing. And many of us are running around with cortisol resistance. Like that's one of the costs of being a badass, is that when you bathe in the soup of high cortisol for too long, maybe you're an ultra marathoner or whatever it is, your receptors start to, you know, go on a siesta and become sluggish. And it's like the boy who cried wolf. They just don't pay attention anymore. They become numb to the message. You don't want that. In fact, 45% of Caucasians have a genetic tendency toward this. They have something called a short serotonin transporter gene, higher rates of fibromyalgia, pain syndromes, post-traumatic stress disorder. We don't want to go down that path. So yeah, we've got to get cortisol in the zone. It's really important, really important. If you learn nothing else today, please manage your cortisol like you manage your 401k.
So cortisol, is that like a one-to-one to stress? Can you treat it that way if you'd like to simplify things, or is that way too reductive?
You mean, does your stress correlate with your cortisol levels? Like, is it a linear relationship?
Right. So if you reduce your stress through things like meditation or light exercise or throttling back exercise in some cases, is that a good step for people who might not be plugged into biohacking equipment?
Yes. So, well, I think I was supposed to give you some, maybe a little checklist. So I do think that those ways of hitting the pause button are worthwhile. I'll give you a quick little thing from my book. I've got a little checklist. Should I share a few of those just so people can get a sense if this is a problem for them?
Yeah,
I made it really easy. I put gray on the side so that you can come back to the little checklist. So here's some of the typical symptoms. Do you feel tired but wired? Kind of a weird paradoxical combination. Oh, I like your glass too.
Thank you. It's usually a mason jar.
Yes, exactly. So do you feel constantly like you're racing from one task to the next? That is classic. That's a classic stress symptom. Do you feel anxious, depressed? We know that 50% of people with depression have high cortisol. And are the doctors checking the cortisol level before they start the latest antidepressant? No.
Right.
So, you know, this is a really important thing to think about. And you're right that, you know, I want all of our listeners to kind of come up with their top list of how they want to hit the pause button. But it doesn't have to be that you're sitting on some cushion every morning for 30 minutes and meditating. There's a really long a la carte menu of how you can manage this. And you got to find the ones that are really fun for you.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. The high octane stress reducers.
Yeah. Well, so this is part of that biohacking conversation, right? Where I like to just go to the ones that I think are the most fun. So I'll give you my top list. And I have to tell you, you know, yes, I practice yoga. I do about a 10 to 90 minute practice almost every day. But I have a lot of people who work with me online and they say, Don't even start with the yoga. I'm not going there. Like I want to shoot myself when I go to a yoga class. So that it doesn't have to be yoga. So one thing you can do is you can use your iPhone. And I love external accountability. I think it's super helpful whether you're a biohacker or not. So I've got my little iPhone right here, and
nice case.
you can use GPS for the soul. It's part of the heart math technology. That's a free app you can download. Inner balance. It raises your heart rate variability, which is a great way to raise oxytocin. We know that oxytocin is not just the hormone of love and bonding, but it lowers your cortisol level. You need this. Orgasm is a way to do that too. But
comes in handy in a pinch.
Exactly. So a hot bath, calling a girlfriend. It's not helpful to call a guy. For some reason, that doesn't help your cortisol levels. It's helpful to call a woman.
I know why.
And I like something called Holosync. That's something that I'm doing right now. It's, a series of tones that you listen to.
Yeah.
From an audio CD. I think that's a very powerful way to observe yourself, to, kind of step out of your drama, above the fray, and to kind of witness what's going on. That's one of the best ways to dance differently with stress and get cortisol into the zone again, into the Goldilocks position.
Now, how about some of the other hormones, specifically the thyroid? That was something that I struggled with. My body temperature was below 96 typically for a while there when I was a vegetarian and doing a lot of things wrong. And my doctor said, oh, that's no big deal. We'll just kind of roll with that, even though everything was off. And I had all the classic symptoms of having a sluggish thyroid. So number one, how do you know if you might fit into that group? And number two, what do you do about it?
Well, thyroid is a really common problem. And I'm glad that you shared your own story with thyroid, because both men and women are affected. Women have about 15 times the rate of men. We're just more vulnerable creatures when it comes to our hormonal balance. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that men are unaffected. And there's many symptoms that can go with that. Having a low body temperature is really classic. Your thyroid is this lovely gland right here. It's in charge of how fast or how slowly you burn calories. So it's the master switch of metabolism. And part of that is the temperature regulation that you're talking about. So a low body temperature can definitely track with an underperforming thyroid, especially low T3. Was that one of your issues? Were you low in T3?
Yep.
So there's many things that can affect how much T3 you make. And just to back up for a second, that's your active thyroid hormone. T3 is really important, and you need sufficient copper, zinc, selenium, vitamin D, iodine, as long as you don't have an autoimmune problem. Those are some of the things you need. You also need cortisol in the right balance. Either high or low cortisol will slow down your thyroid. And when I fixed my cortisol in my 30s, my slow thyroid perked up. It became normal just by fixing the cortisol. So there's a lot of, it's awesome. I love it when you kill two birds with one stone. You kill three birds with one stone, and that is a beautiful day. Yeah. But I think, in terms of symptoms, what are some of the symptoms? Weight gain, fatigue, depression, moodiness. I mentioned 50% of people with depression have high cortisol. Well, 20% of them have a slow thyroid. Wow. And not everybody's getting tested before they get started on the latest antidepressant. So I'm a big fan of really almost applying the 80-20 rule when it comes to hormones and focusing in on those three main hormones that I mentioned for women and for men, and getting those so that they're really loving you up and supporting you in the best possible way. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about sex differences a little bit. I feel like you'd be the perfect person to talk to about that. Obviously, we have a lot of people of either sex in the fan base, and who are very interested in both themselves and people around them, and maybe their significant other. So let's start with women. What do you need to be concerned with, and how can you address it as a biohacker or not, especially female sex hormones like estrogen?
Well, I think for women, start with the hormonal Charlie's Angels. So I like to keep this astonishingly simple, because people who have hormone imbalance, they don't want a big project, right? They want to keep this as simple as possible. Right. So start as a woman with your cortisol, your estrogen, and your thyroid. And the estrogen part's a little bit more complicated. You want that in balance with progesterone. So a lot of women are not in balance. They have estrogen dominance. That can happen at any age, from puberty on through your 80s and 90s. So those are the three that you really want to focus on. And if you want to just dial it back even further and simplify even more, focus on the cortisol. I can tell you 91% of the people that I work with online have a problem with cortisol. They have an issue with energy. They have an issue with a muffin top. They are depleted in those happy brain chemicals. They're taking baby steps towards pre-diabetes, and cortisol is working against them metabolically. So focus on cortisol. That's really an important piece. And for the guys, I have to tell you, when my husband read my book for the first time, he just said, guys need to know about this stuff. I mean, first of all, you need to do a book for guys, or maybe just an app, because we're not as complicated. But for guys who have a woman who's hormonal, your life will be so much better if you can understand and support your woman hormonally. And, like, as my husband says, when you know that you need to run versus, just sort of stay there and offer some chaseberry for the PMS. Yeah. But for the guys, one of the things that I think is so important as you look at your three amigos, your cortisol, your testosterone, and your thyroid, is to zero in on that ratio of testosterone to estradiol. That's really important for guys. You want an optimized ratio. And as many of your listeners probably know, as you get older, especially in your 30s and for sure in your 40s, testosterone starts to go down, estradiol goes up, your ratio is not so good, higher risk of heart disease, man boobs, love handles. We don't want that. Right. You want your six pack.
So how do you make sure that that happens, especially as, hormones are always a moving target? Low T is a huge issue, another issue that a lot of people don't want to talk about. What can you do about it to make it better?
Well, there's a lot of things that are proven. I just was looking at the literature on vitamin D and testosterone, because there were a number of studies, really good evidence, randomized trials showing that vitamin D supplementation increases testosterone levels. And that makes me do the happy dance because vitamin D is so good for your thyroid. It's got like 400 jobs in the body. Right. And that's not even talking about what it does to your genes. So there's some mixed data now. The latest data coming out in the last couple of months is that it may not have the effect on testosterone that we initially saw. It may have, it may be that it's certain subgroups that do well with vitamin D and certain subgroups that don't. So we're still figuring that piece out. But I think, many of the things that you talk about, Abel, like balancing your testosterone with your fork, eating the foods that really nourish you. I think a paleo food plan is one of the most effective ways of raising testosterone if that's your issue. Yeah. Staying away from sugar. Sugar is evil. It's like a drive-by shooting in your body. You don't want that. It's bad for everybody, whether you have low testosterone or not. Yeah. And so, stay away from the stuff. Right. And there's many other ways. Orgasm seems to be the answer to everything. Of course, it does raise your testosterone level. That's a good thing too. Yeah. Well, let's keep going with that topic then. I actually don't talk about this on the show very often, but if we're talking about sex hormones, we might as well talk about sex too. Why not? What is a good intervention for someone who might be struggling in the bedroom like you were before you biohacked yourself into health and happiness? It always sounds a little creepy to say, biohacking yourself, but yes. So I'm a big fan of just give me the top 3 strategies that are proven and really effective. And especially when it comes to women and the issue of low sex drive, let's face it, there is a shameful past here of using vast uncontrolled experiments on women where we gave synthetic hormones that were dangerous and provocative. In fact, we gave them for 57 years before we did the right kind of study to show that they were bad. Yeah. So I am not a fan of just, let me open up my toolkit and give you 5 new drugs. I think we've got to be super smart about this. So what can you do? I think a really important piece is to go back to cortisol. I find that issues with cortisol dysregulation or dysfunction is one of the key problems with low sex drive. For a lot of women, they don't want to have sex because they're burned out. They're just exhausted from running from one task to the next and being all things to all people. Some of this is an issue of perceived stress, boundaries, over providing versus providing, over caring versus caring. Mm-hmm. And so there's, some emotional and psychological stuff in there too. But I think starting with cortisol is really important. When I fixed cortisol, it just made a dramatic difference. I stopped blaming my husband for so many things and actually was much more open to loving him. So that was a big change for me. And then getting estrogen and progesterone in balance. Mm-hmm. So maybe we could get a little bit more granular on that. I'm a big fan of having this lovely tango between the two of them. You want on day 21 of your menstrual cycle or after menopause at any time, you want to have a ratio of about 300 of your progesterone to estradiol. So you want 300 times more progesterone molecules in your body than estradiol molecules. If you have less than that, there's a good chance that you would rather mop the floor than have sex with your man mm-hmm. or your female partner. So I think it's important to manage that ratio. And these things are totally manageable. Like they're not some weird woo-woo subjective factor. You can actually manage these really carefully. And I think that's an important part. And you're divine right. It's sort of something you were born with and we can fix it. And then your thyroid. I think slow thyroid is one of the key reasons why women don't want to have sex. And I used to think we had a problem with this, with kind of an epidemic of low sex drive. And then 50 Shades came out. And now I just think it's the sex on the menu. Like we need to fix the hormones, but we also need to, stop having vanilla sex.
That's a good point. Oh, 50 Shades.
Oh, there she is. She brought up 50 Shades again. Yes. And so one other tip that I really like, and I hope this is okay for our audience.
Go for it.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about hitting the pause button and how it's really important to kind of toggle between those two halves of your brain, the sympathetic nervous system, the on button, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, the off button. You want to have this really lovely interplay between the two. And all the healing and repair happens in the parasympathetic nervous system. I hate to tell you, but that's where the repair happens. Unfortunately. So you can combine all these things. So I'm like the master of the hybrid where you like mash up all these different strategies that we're talking about. You can do orgasmic meditation.
I've heard of this.
Where you combine Zen Buddhism with stroking the clitoris for 13 minutes or stroking the penis for 15 minutes. You can bring these things together. It's a coupled activity. It's, kind of causing a revolution right now. I think that's a great strategy for someone with low sex drive because it gets you focused on the experience, the present moment, and not
the pressure necessarily.
Right. Not hating life. Right.
Not hating life. That's a good thing to work into your habits.
Right. Don't hate life.
So let's talk also about longevity. That's another kind of off the beaten path topic, especially for my audience. I don't get to talk about it much, but I think especially biohacking, when you talk about it, that's one of the main tenets of biohacking. It's not just being at your peak performance now, and you touched on this, it's being at your peak performance when you're 80 or 120 or 300 or whatever. I certainly want to be throwing elbows as a crotchety old man. That sounds like a heck of a lot of fun. So what can you do? Like a big piece of that is optimizing now, but what can you do to lengthen your life and the quality of life?
Yes. Well, the quality of life is so important. I'm glad you raised that because I don't want to just extend life. Like I don't want to be with the walker at 110 years old. I want to be, like having some serious yoga moves when I'm that old. So a couple of things, two things that come to mind really fast. One is I love to track these things obsessively, right? I'm a total geek. And one of the ways that you can track this is with your telomere length. So I'm sure you know about this. Telomeres are those cute little caps on your chromosomes, and they are the best marker we have right now for biological aging versus chronological aging. And Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF got the Nobel Prize for her work on this. And she studied mostly premenopausal women. So she found that women who have high perceived stress, high cortisol, have the fastest aging. In fact, they age about 10 years faster than women who have a more normal relationship or skills around managing stress.
Yeah.
So this is one of those really important costs of being a badass or, sort of stewing in too much stress. It's not just that, you can take up meditation at some point in the future. You want to deal with this right now. This is part of the why care. And we know that if you have longer, more lovely telomeres, you're going to age better, age more slowly, have a lower rate of cancer, less degenerative disease. I want to sign up for that. So that's a really good thing. And these same things that we're talking about, like omega-3s, they help your telomeres. So that's one piece. Another piece I mentioned as well is the lean body mass. So, the typical choice that people make, well, let's put it this way. I would say starting at 35, you have a choice. You're either going to grow and you're going to keep augmenting and optimizing your lean body mass, or you're going to start that slow decline and become more doughy, have more fat show up on your body and, just sort of give up. And if you're not making a choice, then by default, you're choosing that slow decline. So I think folks like you, Abel, are making that choice to grow your lean body mass, to optimize it, at least maintain it as you get older. And that's a really important thing that people can do for longevity.
How do you make that choice?
Well, I think it has to do with how you architect your day. It has to do with the goals that you set around exercise. I mean, I would love to hear actually how you do it, because I have a sense that you do it, but I'm making that up.
I actually have my notebook right here.
Oh, good. You're such a biohacker.
I was, it's funny because this week I'm definitely burning myself out a little bit. And I know that it's happening, but I'm also going to Thailand in a couple of weeks for 2.5 weeks. And right now, I was just telling my friend, he's like, how's your week going? And I'm like, I have, 14 interviews, 5 speaking engagements, a music show that I'm playing, and a launch of a new product on Monday. So I'm a little bit fried. So just as an exercise of my own sanity, I can, for the people who have video, I put it right here. You can't see my chicken scratch, but I have 1 through 5. What are my priorities? I have number 1, health and sanity. And that includes things like meditation, sex, exercise, music, Krav Maga, getting sun, walking the dog, things like that. Number 2 is work.
Good.
Writing, vision, guiding the ship, that sort of thing. Interviews. Number 3 is learning.
Work is number 2. Aim. I like that.
Number 3 is learning. And that's just, reading or listening to new audios, expanding my mind in some way or another. And 4 and 5 are social. Number 4 is close friends and family, making a priority to have at least one coffee break with them or a dinner or something like that. And number 5, the last one, is my extended network, which is Facebook and Twitter and other stuff like that. That really just kind of sucks up most people's time. And I think that actually is a huge stressor for most people, right? It's something that's just kind of there and popping up on their phone and on their computer constantly. They don't really get that chance to exercise that restorative mode that you were talking about before.
It's true, although it does serve a purpose. I think one of the reasons why Facebook and social media is so popular is it does 2 things. It raises dopamine, and we all, most of us need more dopamine in our prefrontal cortex. It just gives us a little hit, and it helps us focus, and it feels good. It's the brain chemical of pleasure and satisfaction. The other thing that social media does is that it raises your oxytocin.
That is so interesting.
Isn't that amazing? So we love oxytocin. It does so many things. It lowers cortisol, as I mentioned. It makes your thyroid more efficient. It helps you with your estrogen balance. It raises testosterone. Of course, hugging 8 times a day is another way to raise oxytocin. So that's coming in number 4. That's a higher priority than number 5. But I love how you frame this, because when you have health and sanity first, it allows you to kind of architect your day in such a way that you're making a choice to increase your lean body mass.
Right.
So I really love the simplicity of that. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. It's not, and it's something that we all continue to struggle with, right? Sometimes everyone's life gets out of hand from time to time, but when you write down that number 1 is your sanity and your health, then it's not something that you get around to if you have the time. I used to teach guitar, and it was so interesting because so many of the kids would just play. You know, you didn't have to tell them you need to play. It was just like they wanted to play. And all the adults, not all, but a lot of the adults, even the ones who wanted to learn guitar yesterday, are all about like, they want results, but they don't want to play. And they're just like, I don't have the time. And it's like, well, you have the time. You make whatever. Everyone has exactly the same amount of time. Even crazed mothers who have 17 million things to do have the same amount of time as everyone else. It's about making that time for the most important thing. So you now, I do want to touch upon this before, because we're running out of time, but perceived stress versus actual stress. What does that mean?
Yeah, so this was a really interesting finding in the work of Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF when she was looking at the telomere length. And she found that the women who were totally stressed out of their minds, who had the highest perceived stress, were the ones with the shortest telomeres. They were the ones that were aging 10 years faster. Now, she had other women who were under the same amount of stress. What she was looking at was women who had a child in the intensive care unit at UCSF. So she saw women who had the same stressors, but they responded to it differently. So it all has to do with your reaction. It's similar to what you're just describing. It's not so much that you're time starved. It's more that it's an issue of priorities.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's part of the point that you were making. And so similarly, when it comes to stress, it's not that you've got to reduce your stress or get rid of the stressors. It's more you want to change your skillfulness and how you interact with them.
Yeah.
You know, there's this psychiatrist that I love, Viktor Frankl, who said, in the gap between stimulus and response lies your freedom. And I think that's really powerful. It's sort of beautiful. Part of those priorities that you're describing. And, you know, the other thing that you just described that I want to honor you for is you're talking about how you're kind of balls to the wall right now. Like you're working hard, you're doing all these interviews before you go off to Thailand, and that's fine. Like there's a way to do kind of a sprint recovery cycle here, similar to what we do with exercise, sprint recovery, sprint recovery. You just got to make sure that you've got the recovery time, like the trip to Thailand.
Yeah. And tomorrow I'm doing absolutely nothing. That's
yes.
I cleared my calendar. I need to like make a phone call or two, but the other days are all crazy, but I always make sure that I engineer that into my process. And you need to have time for breaks. Those are the ones, you know, engineering that time into your day makes you more productive during the times that you're working and the times that you're not. Like I write most of my blog posts when I'm walking my dog, just in my head. That's when it comes to you. That's where the creativity is. That's where the real genius is in yourself and the way that you operate. So many people just kind of forge straight ahead through that and never get to that point where they're actually thinking or creating. They're just responding constantly.
You're so right. I mean, you are a genius. You are a total genius.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
This is what we want all of our listeners to do. I mean, I would say one of our goals on this planet is to kind of be our best self, right? Yeah. I'm going to get woo-woo for just a moment. I'm from Berkeley, so hopefully I could have like 30 seconds to go woo-woo on you. So you want like your higher feminine and your higher masculine in balance, and having those unstructured days where you allow yourself to just be in the flow and kind of have a recovery to your sprint cycle. Totally brilliant. Totally brilliant. We all need that.
Everyone does. Yeah. And
your adrenals need it.
Yeah. Poor adrenals. So we're just about out of time, Sara, but why don't we talk about what you're working on now and what you have coming up? Sure.
Well, we're still getting the word out on my book, The Hormone Cure. And if you want to learn more about any hormone issues that you have, you could take our quiz. I can give you the link for that. It's thehormonecurebook.com/quiz. I'm working on my next book. I'm really excited about that.
Nice.
I'm going to be a little bit careful about what it is, but it has to do with hormone receptors, because I think people don't understand that it's not just your hormone levels. Like that whole piece about molecular sex is really important. You've got to pay attention to the receptors, and you've got to be kind of arrhythmic and disruptive about how you balance your hormones. You can't just do the same boring thing every day. It's kind of like exercise. Your body gets used to that and it doesn't move the needle for you anymore.
True. So before we go, what's one thing that people can do right now that would apply to improving their lives in some way?
Super simple. I would say put your hand over your heart, slow down your breathing. I feel like the Pledge of Allegiance here. And imagine that you're inhaling into your heart and exhaling from your heart. And just imagine one person that you absolutely love, who loves you, and just picture their face and connect to that love. This is a way of increasing your coherence, your heart intelligence, raising your oxytocin. It's one simple thing that you can do. It only takes a couple of minutes. It turns out that your adrenals don't listen to your brain. The brain doesn't tell them what to do. It's not totally in charge. I used to think it was, and it's not. Your heart tells your brain to tell your adrenals what to do. So it's all about the heart. More heart.
That is so cool. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Sara, for taking the time. This was a blast. I would love to have you come on. We could talk for 8 hours about all this stuff.
The answer is yes, Abel. Whatever the question is, the answer is yes. My husband would agree.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We'll have to have you on again soon.
Thank you, Abel. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.